Hello and welcome to the Hindu's Parley podcast. I am KV Prasad, and today we are going to discuss, is it necessary for non-Hindi speaking people to learn Hindi? We discussed this topic in the context of the three-language formula being advocated by the National Education Policy and the stiff resistance it has met from non-Hindi speaking states such as Tamil Nadu, which rejected this formula way back in 1968 and had adopted a two-language policy, English and Tamil. While the Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan had stated that the NEP's aim was not to impose Hindi on any state, Tamil Nadu has refused to buy this and fears that the ultimate aim is to impose Hindi on non-Hindi speaking states. We have two eminent personalities discussing this topic, Mr. Yogendra Yadav and Mr. T.M. Krishna. Mr. Yogendra Yadav is an eminent psephologist, the founding national president of the political party Swaraj India. Mr. Krishna is a carnatic vocalist and author who's endeavored to take his chosen field of art to a larger section of society through an inclusive approach. And both of them are known for their critical thinking and for their courage to speak truth to power. So it's only appropriate that when it comes to a burning issue, such as the language formula, we have two such persons who will provide us great insights into what is happening and what should be the way forward. Thank you for joining us, and we'll go back to the first question. Is it necessary for non-Hindi speaking people to learn Hindi? Mr. Yogendra, can we begin with you?
Thank you. Frankly, I'm not sure if this is a very good formulation of the question because this question can have only one straightforward answer: no, in capital letters. One, because we are a union of state, and the spirit of federalism and respect for diversity that informs our union presupposes that nothing can be imposed on any state, least of all language policy. There has been a convention. We have had different policies, different views on language in this state. And the convention, post independence convention, has been that they are resolved through consensus, not by imposition. So I don't think there can be two questions about what the union government has done by holding back grants. To my mind, this is simply unconstitutional. This is not done. Also, this comes in a political context. It's not just one decision of Ministry of Education. It comes in in the context of encroachment on Tamil Nadu government's rights by the central government repeatedly, and by the most blatant, brazen, unconstitutional conduct of the governor. So, in the context of all this, I fully understand why people in Tamil Nadu, not just the ruling party, but actually across the parties, and I would imagine the people of Tamil Nadu feel very slighted by this and wish to oppose it. So, on the question of imposition, we cannot have any two opinions. And a deeper thing is that Indian nationalism is not European nationalism. Our nationalism is on the foundations of respect for diversity. And in the national movement, it was quite understood that it is by respecting each other's languages and cultures that we can grow. But the reason why I think it's not a good question is that if this is the only question we discuss in the language debate, unfortunately, we do not take up the big real issues, namely, what is the method to foster multilinguality, which has always been the defining characteristic of our civilization. How do we deal with relationship between different Indian languages, including languages which are today called dialects? And how do we deal with the elephant in the room, namely the hegemony of the English language? It's sad to frame every language issue with reference only to Hindi. Hindi should not be the principal issue of multilingual federal debates in our country.
Mr. Krishna?
Firstly, I'm in agreement with Mr. Yogendra Yadav that there's no two ways to this. Hindi cannot be imposed, full stop. And to deny funds on the basis of accepting the NEP or accepting three language policy is um, unconstitutional, it's unethical, it's devoid of any basic decency. So I don't think there can be any other response to that fundamental thing. But even if I was going to extend that and say, ask this question, why three languages? Um, Even if I'm willing to accept what I don't believe is true, that Hindi is not being imposed, because I think it's being done in a different way. We'll come to that. If I was going to accept that, yes, it's only about multilingualism and it is about having three languages in a school, even that argument to me seems completely out of place. So, first, let's be clear what we mean by this. We are saying three languages to be taught in schools by a school as part of the subject matter. We are not talking about individuals or students learning other languages on their own accord, which is anyway happening. So that's not the conversation here. I'm saying this specifically because we're hearing examples of Tamil speaking Hindi or some Hindi belt, somebody speaking Telugu, but that's not what we're discussing. So let's look at it in the larger picture. We have here a government who's deleting chapters from history textbooks selectively. And when asked why, they say no, there is too much of burden of education, of subject and heaviness. But here, they're not even willing to look at the fact that another language is definitely a burden on a student. Now, let's also think about the first generation student. And there are many generation, even second generation students going to school. This extra language is definitely a burden. So, even in terms of just subject matter, this makes absolutely no sense to me. What about this other argument that children between the age until the age of 7 pick up languages very fast? Yes, but there is another aspect to that which is not being discussed, is that after the age of 8, these languages must be in use, not as subject matter but in use. So how does it make any sense for a child or a student living in Madurai or Trichy to learn, say, not Hindi, even Gujarati at that time? Also, remember, children in primary and middle school don't have the equipment to think of future in terms of time and in terms of the extent that adults think. So, we are imposing upon them a third language. That itself is an imposition. Then, this facade about unity, that bringing languages, or rather teaching languages, different languages creates unity, I think is completely a smokescreen to not be believed. Because again, the moment you force a language, it is not unity. You actually create fear in so many students about a language. You create unnecessary repercussions. For example, say Tamil Nadu is going to choose between Malayalam, Kannada, or Telugu. Which do we choose? Now, will it make sense to say, okay, the borders closer to Karnataka will teach Kannada, the border regions near Kerala will teach Malayalam? No, demography doesn't work that way. In Coimbatore, for example, there are a lot of people who speak Telugu. Now, are we going to impose Malayalam on them? So, this is very, very complicated. Just like people are saying today, let the people decide about three language. I think about whether they want three language or two language in Tamil Nadu, to be specific, people didn't decide about three language policy. Just some people in government made this decision and it was collectively accepted. So that was not a people's decision. So there are multiple reasons. And finally, has three language worked? Let's think of that. I just Googled some data before I came on, and according to a newspaper, over 5,000 schools in UP are managed by one single teacher. Bihar has a huge teacher shortage. So, even in terms of resource, how does three language make sense? And why do we learn languages? That also has to be seen, and I hope I'll come to that in the next exchange between Yogendra and me.
You were talking about this extra language learning being a huge burden on students. But at the same time, I think the government had also overlooked the fact that three language teaching is going to be a burden on the government also. In the sense, where are the you need vast number of teachers and logistics, both in Hindi speaking and non-Hindi speaking states. How is that going to be doable? How is this going to be achieved? It's not only a burden on the students; it's going to be a burden on the administration also. Don't you think so, Mr. Yadav?
uh, I think once we separate the question of the validity of the three language formula from everything other that clouds it momentarily, then we can have a informed and serious conversation. So, as I said, I'm entirely with the TMK on saying on the imposition issue, on the government trying to withhold the funds, on anyone saying if it's three language, then it has to be Hindi, and on the issues of the practical, some of the practical issues. Let me, so once we've separated that, and if we can focus on the core pedagogic, cultural, and political issue of is three language formula a good policy per se for a country like India? Whether we can implement today, tomorrow, do resources allow it, how exactly it is to be done. For the moment, let me keep these separate, come back to them. I just want to say that, we discuss sometimes the debate on three language formula begins in this country as if someone had made a proposal yesterday and if we are beginning to discuss it today. This three language formula is not a new idea, not an idea proposed by BJP, not an idea proposed by the previous Congress government. This is an idea that has its roots in the Radhakrishnan Commission, 1948-49, followed by Kothari Commission, 64-65, followed by Chief Minister's Convention, followed by two major educational policy statements, and followed by a very unusual document that I would recommend to everyone, done by some of the finest linguists of this country. And no one would accuse any of them to be Hindi walas or Hindi supremacists or anything of that kind. The argument that they had made, and this last document that I'm referring to, is a position paper created for the National Curriculum Framework in 2005-6, done by very progressive people who were as opposed to any imposition of Hindi as TMK would have been. The basic argument they have made is that primary school teaching should predominantly focus on language skills, that all three languages should not be introduced simultaneously in primary school, that the child should begin with mother tongue. The education should be as close to the mother tongue as possible, which is to say, in some parts of Rajasthan, the language of primary education should not be Hindi, it should be Marwadi. In some parts of Chhattisgarh, it can be Chhattisgarh, it should be Chhattisgarhi, or in UP, it will be Awadhi, Braj, and whatever, all the languages that we know. From there, the child should graduate to what are called the model languages, which is languages like Hindi, Kannada, Gujarati, Bengali. All these are standardized modern languages, each of which encompass a number of languages. While doing this, they should be taught English as well. And in the middle school, they should be introduced to a third language, which is a modern Indian language, a language which can be chosen in different places at different points. My suspicion is that so much of angst against three language formula comes not from pedagogical concerns, but from a justified reaction to the fact that the three language formula was proposed but sabotaged by North India. It was sabotaged because while the expectation was that all the South Indian states and Eastern Indian states would learn Hindi, Hindi speakers found a shortcut for themselves by not learning any new language, and they used Sanskrit as a shield not to learn a new language. So, in effect, the three language formula became a formula where everyone else was forced to learn my mother tongue, but I would not learn anyone else's mother tongue. Obviously, everyone else would resent it. I think that has unfortunately clouded the debate on multilinguality in our country. As for the fact that there are only one teacher school, but TMK would agree that in one teacher school, you cannot even teach mathematics, you cannot teach science, you cannot teach geography. That cannot be an argument against not teaching science or maths or geography. That has to be an argument about changing the character of those schools. That we fail to teach anything is neither an argument for three language formula nor an argument against three language formula. I would urge everyone to look at the data on the linguistic learning outcomes. I looked at learning outcomes. These are admittedly limited evidence. It is from asserts survey that takes place every year. I looked up asserts survey scores of language achievement in Tamil Nadu and compared it to comparable states. I did not compare it to Kerala because Kerala's the achievement scores are higher in every respect all the time. But compare it to Karnataka, compare it to Andhra Pradesh. Unfortunately, the fact is that the proficiency of rural students in Tamil Nadu, in Tamil language, is no better than the proficiency of Kannada students in Karnataka or in other places. In fact, the proficiency of Tamil Nadu students in Tamil is actually comparable to some of the North Indian states' proficiency in Hindi, which is to say, very bad. So, the fact that we have such poor levels of education, as I said, is not an argument for one language policy or for two language. So, it's actually not clear whether having only two languages has helped us at least learn those two languages better. The point about burden of education is something which experts have handled and have come to a conclusion that actually, if you teach a third language, provided you teach it, it only helps your primary and secondary language. So, I do believe that three language formula by itself was not a bad formula, is something we need to consider seriously. We need to work out ways, just as we work out ways for ensuring which subjects to offer in plus two. You don't offer all the subjects. Schools teach, schools pick up some subjects, offer limited range. I know of schools which do follow a genuine three language formula. I have schools in Delhi, school to which my own kids went. They did not give you all the 22 languages, but they gave you three or four options to choose from. So all these things can be worked out, provided there is a political will, provided there is a capacity to teach anything. So I would not. Unfortunately, that's really what happened, and also happened with my remarks. Because the moment that, given the charged political atmosphere in which we discuss things, the question of the merits of three language or multilingual teaching is conflated with BJP government, Hindi imposition, and such like. I think we should separate these things.
Mr. Krishna, your take.
Well, I think, first of all, multilingualism, I don't think it's just a political problem. I think there's a pedagogic notion also we have to think of, because today also pedagogical methods have changed. We are looking at primary and middle school of activity based learning. We're looking at experiential learning, and there is already two languages at play, and it's that itself is multilingual. And I think that even in the way we are looking at primary learning today, with many alternate methods that are there, which is not just language based in terms of the traditional understanding of language, but in terms of experience, in terms of relationship learning, in terms of emotional intelligence. I think that in all this, keeping all this as being the way primary and middle school learning is going, I do not believe that multilingualism, in terms of just language as a way of making people, shall we say, um, diverse in feeling and in being, which I think what multilingualism hopes to achieve at some level, is necessarily, that is the necessary way to do it, by asking for another language. Now, that is one point. The second thing I want to say, in terms of the fact that resources are less, does it mean that adding a language is burden or not? I think the point that I'm trying to make is that when resources are less, it makes more sense to look at ways in which we can teach the primary subjects that we anyway need to teach. And when their mother tongue is the mode of learning, the mode of communication in class, and there is already English, we can debate English also. I do not believe adding another language is necessary. That is the primary point I'm saying. That the fact that the schools have to be better, we have to have more teachers, a universal comment, which I think I'm in complete agreement with Yogendra. Now, to the quality of Tamil education in Tamil schools, now we are opening a completely different discussion. Is the language being taught the way language has to be taught? So we have to ask questions like, why do people learn language? Or why do people communicate? It's about communicate, it's about living with a diverse set of people. And don't forget, language is also an emotional being. There is an emotional connection with language. People, for example, learn language when they make relationships. They learn languages through different ways in life. So we can't forget the cultural character of how language is picked up or language is learned. I think what we should be also talking about, since we're looking at multiculturalism, multilingualism, I think one of the problems we are not discussing in this discussion is the fact that every language has been homogenized. We are talking about Hindi as if it's not even Hindi and Marwadi, like he's talking about. I'm just taking Tamil. One of the things we have done in Tamil or in Kannada and Telugu, we've standardized one notion of that language in a school, which generally, by the way, is implicitly also carrying forward very caste related location in terms of what words are used, what terms are used. Those are things that I think we should be discussing also. And those are more important in terms of, is, for example, the teaching of Hindi or teaching of Kannada or teaching of Telugu or Bengali or Tamil in every region, in that own state, representative of the people, of the diverse people who speak that language. Now, that itself, in my opinion, is multilingualism and multiculturalism. And that to me is what we should be addressing, rather than, in a way, looking at another language in this entire discussion. And so I think multiculturalism and multilingualism is not necessarily about the primary languages or the official languages of this country necessarily. I think it is about even the diversity. For me, it is about the diversity within the language. And I think that's where pedagogy needs to come in. Will we accept terms that come from marginalized sections of society of the same language? Will that term be used in a classroom? Will the same lesson, for example, which is taught in two different regions of the same state, even Tamil Nadu or in Kerala, have those words that are common parlance, used in common parlance in that area of that state? This to me is a more important conversation we should be having. So the question of three language as being something that is pedagogically okay and should be accepted, and the fact that the resistance is purely maybe political, and like Yogendra said, the Hindi imposition brought in, even keeping that aside, I do believe that the new way we look at primary education, we look at middle school education, also means that there is no necessity for a third language specifically in primary and middle school. Now, vis-a-vis higher education, we need to probably have a different discussion. There could be two, three different ways of looking at it. But definitely, I feel, even in terms of pedagogy, primary and middle school, there's no necessity for the third language in saying that we need multilingualism and therefore a third language contributes to multilingualism and works in a certain pedagogic way. I think there are many pedagogic ways in which two languages and other ways in which we can actually develop what we will call very sensitive and open and honestly affectionate human beings who will be able to look beyond all the limitations that society creates, because that is the essence of what we are talking about in education. Can we have a future generation that can listen to each other, can speak to each other, can talk to each other, and have relationships that go beyond the boundaries that we ourselves have created? Because that is the sense of why we want education beyond mathematics and science. I think at a more ethical level, I think both Yogendra and I will agree that's what we're hoping to create in a generation.
Can I quickly say why I agree with TMK on two or three things? I mean, the only reason I brought in the learning outcome issue was that, after 50 years of disagreement and clear policy, two language policy being followed, we do not yet. I mean, after 50 years, we do not have evidence to show that teaching two languages has led to at least better acquisition of those two languages where they are not burdened by three. And I was just making, which is not to say that Tamil Nadu has done poorly. I think Tamil Nadu is a trailblazer in many other aspects of education welfare policies. It just shows that the, the question is about our ability to teach anything. If we run schools poorly, you have one language formula, things would be bad. Two language formula, it will be bad. Three language formula, it will be bad. And that seems to be currently dominating our discussion. But the very important point that TMK made about the languages that have been submerged, the so called dialects, second, the different registers of the same language, social registers of the same language. I think it's very, very critical point. And the report that I mentioned, done by pedagogists and linguists of the country, uh, in fact, that's the point they emphasize. They say primary education should not be in one of, I mean, you should not begin by teaching a child in one of these so-called standard languages that we have today, Hindi, Bengali, because each of these languages is actually at a distance from the language that the child actually speaks at home. So Marwari, or I took examples of some of the languages in within Hindi. You could say the same about Bengali. Someone who speaks Rajbangshi at home goes to speak school and is told that your mother tongue is Bengali. Now there is a distance that they feel. And Rajbangshi as a language is also a language connected more to the community, which is a Dalit community. So these are things to be worked at, and there cannot be any doubt. And if someone asked me, is that your priority, or would three language be your priority? I would certainly join uh, TM Krishna and say, well, this is my priority. That is to say, teach the children that initiation in their school should be in a language and a register which is as close to the language spoken at home as possible. And our failure, irrespective of one language, two language, three language, our failure to do that has been at an enormous cost to children who come from disadvantaged communities. So there we have, I think, a complete agreement on that issue.
Okay. In this context, if you see in the northern states, the Hindi speaking northern states, it's largely monolingualism. They have been teaching in Hindi. In Tamil Nadu also, if you look at many government schools, they have taught in Tamil. And that's why Tamil Nadu says that we have no problem with our bilingual policy. We have seen all round developments. Our students have come up well. This is an argument that Tamil Nadu has placed in the face of the Union Minister, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, saying that you are standing in the way of the aspirations of students by rejecting the three language formula. But Tamil Nadu argues very clearly that look, with the two language formula for so many years, we have done well. Our students have done well and gone on to occupy very good positions also. Without the need for a third language to be learnt.
As I said, Tamil Nadu has been a trailblazer in many welfare policies in the country. In fact, that's why last year, year before last, I had spoken of Dakshina, and I had said that North India should learn models from South India. Uh, but as yet, we do not have evidence to support the idea that bilingualism, that is to say, the official policy of teaching two languages, has served better than official policy of teaching three languages. As I said, the evidence that I have seen so far does not show that when rural schools are concerned, and that's the majority, that the learning outcome from rural schools for which we have data do not confirm the idea uh, that the language learning outcomes are better in Tamil Nadu than in comparable states. So that continues to remain an open question. I'm sure TMK knows it much better than I do. But incidentally, this is not just about Tamil. Language learning outcomes in English language are also not better in Tamil Nadu compared to comparable states. If you compare Tamil Nadu to Uttar Pradesh, of course, everything works better in Tamil Nadu than Uttar Pradesh. But similarly, if you compare Tamil Nadu to Kerala, of course, in every respect, Kerala learning outcomes are better than Tamil Nadu. But that's not a good comparison. Himachal Pradesh outcomes would always be better than Rajasthan outcomes in every respect. That's not a good comparison. And I thought, and then as far as the monolingualism of North India is concerned, in one sense, I think it's a correct observation because, as I said, North Indians found a way to avoid teaching the third language. However, English language is being taught throughout North India in whichever way they to teach anything. They teach mathematics poorly, they teach English also poorly, but it's not correct to say that there is no English language being taught in North Indian states. It's taught as poorly and as ridiculously as it is in most other parts of the country. The real issue that we don't somehow handle and we don't talk about is the if a false sense that many people in North India have developed, especially in the Hindi speaking areas, that somehow Hindi as a language is more privileged than any other language. Um, Many people in North India use the word national language, a figure of speech that does not is not mentioned by a constitution, that doesn't exist. And it is this false sense of supremacy which is not justified by anything in reality. This is what irks the non Hindi speaker, this assumed sense of superiority of some of the Hindi speakers. As I said, it is not justified by anything because, in terms of history, the Hindi that we know today is a very recent and a very young language, unlike languages like Tamil, which are some of the oldest languages and richest languages in the country, or say language like Kannada, which is in literary terms is such a rich language. So it's not justified by history and culture. It is not justified by the actual achievement in terms of language, the literature produced today, except creative writing. There's very little of high quality being produced in educational terms in Hindi. And the only claim to assertion of Hindi comes from the sheer numbers which have been mobilized by subsuming a large number of languages. I think that is what people react to, and that is what takes the debate in very false directions. And as a Hindi speaker, as someone who loves Hindi language, just as TM Krishna would love Tamil, um, I have no hesitation in saying, I have in fact argued over and over again. I've written several articles to say this thing called Hindi Divas, the 14th of September, that is observed as Hindi Divas, the Hindi Day, should be abolished. And I actually have also argued that this whole notion of Rajbhasha, Hindi having a status higher than other languages, has not served Hindi, it has not served India. Um, it has only served to distance Hindi from other Indian languages. It has only served to create a sense of uh, animosity and has fed this very false sense of pride and superiority. I personally would, as Hindi speaker, I have no hesitation in saying that all the 22 languages mentioned in the eighth schedule should be made the official language of this country. So that, and that's one thing we have not touched so far in our discussion today, so that all the 22 languages can realize that all of them are being subject to hegemony and oppression of the English language. That is the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. And I suspect that everything else becomes such a easy uh, way of evading this elephant in the room. We are happy to talk about dialects, we are happy to talk about registers of a language, we are happy to talk about relationship between Hindi, Tamil, Kannada, and so on. But that's not the most important thing happening in our country on languages today. The real issue, I mean, have you ever seen billboards of Hindi learning courses? Have you ever seen people in a mad rush to somehow learn Hindi language or Tamil for that matter or Kannada for that matter? There is a mad race for English, a race which is not fostered by the innate quality of English language, but a race which is fostered by our our policies, economic policies, as political policies. That is what we should be talking about.
Okay. Mr. Krishna?
Yeah, I'll come to English at the end. That's where you left out. But I think this, as much as we're looking at data, I think one thing that we would like to know is how many of the schools in North India that professed to teach three languages really taught three languages. I think that we would like to know. It's very difficult to get data like that, but that we would like to know. Though in principle, it's a three-language policy, and were three languages taught? What was the what data do we have on that third language which was taught? That we would really like to know. So that I
TM,
think,
can I interrupt and just answer
yeah,
it in a second?
yeah, sure. I'd like to know. Yeah,
As I've said, the simple answer is that in every North Indian state, they teach Hindi, they teach English, and they teach Sanskrit. Sanskrit, which has become a way to bypass the requirement of the third language. So technically,
exactly my
yes,
point.
they
That's
teach
the point
three.
I'm making actually.
Technically, they teach three, but in
No, but
effect,
I want to say
it
something
is.
here. Exactly why I came to that actually, because there is here a very important cultural point that needs to be linguistic cultural points that needs to be understood about Tamil people and Tamil language. So it is not just the politics of the last 80 years that is. Would you say driving this resistance? There is a cultural and linguistic difference. Tamil as a language is very distinct from every other Sanskrit based or Sanskrit derived languages. Even the other Dravidian languages like Kannada, Telugu, or Malayalam have used Sanskrit in a manner that it is still can be perceived very clearly as Sanskrit. They have a lot of Sanskrit in them. Now, are there Sanskrit words in Tamil? Yes, of course there are. But they are subsumed in the grammar of Tamil, which is very distinct and very different. A Tamil speaker will tell you, very different from languages that have intimate association, if I may say, with Sanskrit. This fundamentally makes it a very difficult task for a Tamil speaker to even learn Hindi or many other languages. This is a real cultural linguistic problem that needs to be understood. For example, a simple thing in Hindi, for example, having gender for inanimate objects is incomprehensible for a Tamil speaker. It's not understood. All I'm saying is that there is, and this is not about one generation, this is a cultural being. And therefore, when that third language you said is Sanskrit, for example, in northern states, there is still a connectivity between the two languages. Now, again, all of us know how Sanskrit is taught in most of schools, whether they are in North India or in South India, or east or west. So I'm going to keep that aside as whether it's really taught. But even keeping that aside, there is here something very deep, which is linguistic, which is cultural, which has a great, and with that individuality and distinctness comes also a different way of looking at language itself. Now, you could, I'm not giving you anecdotal evidence. I know the minister gave some anecdotal evidence of some girl he met in IIT Kharagpur. I could also give. So at the same time, I want to say something here. Tamil Nadu, people have learned other languages on their own volition. Hindi Prachar Sabha has been there. You could learn Telugu in Tamil Nadu. You can learn Kannada in Tamil Nadu. So there's never been, shall we say, a barrier to learn Hindi even in Tamil Nadu. Or even when people point out to say name boards being, blackened, it is only when there is a feeling of threat towards Tamil that these incidents happen. Otherwise, in railway stations in Tamil Nadu, there are announcements in Hindi. Nobody protests on an everyday basis. So, also, why I'm saying this here is I want to also remove this image that has been created that Tamil people are every day getting on the streets and saying something about Hindi. No, that is not a reality. People in Tamil Nadu, when there is a person from a different location coming, some broken Tamil, broken Hindi, there's something so beautiful that happens in Tamil Nadu. The similar thing when a Tamil person goes, I think, for example, the minister spoke about a girl from Namakkal. Now, from Namakkal, people who make borewells and are lorry workers go and work in UP. In 6 months, they learn Hindi. So I'm saying this organic thing is always happening beyond three languages or being say made the standard. So the problem here I want to highlight is the fact that linguistically there is a huge difference between Tamil especially and the other Indian languages. Now, one other point I want to make: who are the people among Tamil speakers who find it easier, say, to speak Hindi or any of those languages? It is people who come from a Brahminical background. And I think this is another aspect that is being missed in this debate. People from a Brahminical background hear Sanskrit in some manner or learn some Vedic chant in some manner, and there is those sounds and those vocabularies and those shabdas, as you could call them, hovering around their homes and their cultural environment. This is why you find people like me, for example, finding it much easier to access Hindi because that is part of my Brahminical growing up. So within this debate also exists the hierarchy of social order, which gives certain people an easier access to these kind of languages, whereas compared to most of Tamil speaking people. This is a minority, micro minority compared to most of Tamil speaking people. So there is this underlying other aspect that is being played. Another layer to this is the private school and the public school aspect. That too is part of a social order. This is true of UP, this is true of Bihar, this is true of Bengal, Tamil Nadu, any part of this country. And this is also a debate we should be asking. Why are parents wanting to put their children in private schools? And also, among private schools, if you look at CBSE schools, let's even go there specifically. There is a caste elitism in CBSE schools where you find these languages, Sanskrit being taught. There is if you take an average of a caste bandwidth of people who go to CBSE schools, where a state board private schools, vis-a-vis state board government schools, you will see a demography that kind of gives you um, a microcosm of how society is divided. Very unfortunately, but that I think is also a reality. Now, coming to this final point that Yogendra made about English. It's all well to say, nobody will disagree that English is dominating at least a certain level of intellectual discourse. That's probably specific. Intellectual discourse, or the idea of knowledge itself today, unfortunately, is being encapsulated within the English vocabulary. I don't think we can deny that that is something we have to look at. My answer to that would be the strengthening of every one of those languages in those respective states and the dialects in those states. That is what my response. The other thing, it also depends who is saying this. Yogendra and I are having this conversation in English. We have the privilege of transcending that threshold and being able to be comfortable in multi languages, at the same time hold an order in English. English also has been a great help for many people, especially from marginalized sections of society, to actually make something of themselves in this very complicated social political world that is India. Now, that is one of the reasons why they want to send their children to an English medium school. That aspiration is there everywhere. Now, if you're going to address that, and we need to be very sensitive and very careful about this, because there is also the fact that English gives them access to the larger world, gives them access to being able to travel, to speak to people in who don't speak their language. It does, and beyond borders to a large extent. We have to agree, globally, English goes beyond borders, even in Europe, where most education happens in the respective languages. PhDs are written in Italian, in French, etc. English allows for a certain travel. And I think that is what people also see. So while we must address this idea of English, I think we should be very careful about what we mean by saying that and how we think we should go about that. Now, finally, if I may add one thing, something that many people have been saying is that Hindi is not being imposed in the NEP, etc. And I think the word itself appears maybe once or twice. I think what is very fascinating for me while I read the NEP was to see and I think Yogendra hinted at it, is a number of times Sanskrit actually appears in the NEP. About 20 times. And if you look at how it is positioned, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not reading directly, there is this entire couple of paragraphs. One of the paragraphs, you're talking about common phonetic and scientifically arranged alphabets, scripts, and a grammatical structure of sources of vocabulary of languages that have in some way a Sanskrit origin. And they say other classical languages. So this wording is very problematic, deeply problematic, and it says a lot. Similarly, there is a line that says importance to classical languages and literature of India cannot be overlooked. And then there is an entire paragraph about teaching Sanskrit, about having teaching Sanskrit through Sanskrit knowledge system, and every other Indian language, Indian classical language, is dumped into one another casual paragraph. The same thing is done in higher education. The same thing is done in higher education. While Sanskrit is almost seen to be something that should be made a spoken language, of course, it covers so many different subjects, etc. And I'm not, let me be very clear. I have nothing against a language. I think none of us do. It is about how it is being presented. Even Persian and Pali and Prakrit, which feature in the along with the many other languages that they speak, is only considered for preservation and for enrichment or something like that. So, this again, positioning of Sanskrit in the NEP, especially for a Tamil speaker, is you have to concede is very intimidating, especially when you have a language that is so distinct and that is grammatically and structurally very different.
You want to say something about that?
Yeah, I really would like to. You see, as far as Sanskrit is concerned, I think I am almost entirely in agreement with TMK on multiple. A, the current government's policy and posturing of somehow positioning Sanskrit as the principal carrier of our cultural heritage is completely mistaken. It should be, the record should be set straight, and I'm so happy that Tamil Nadu is doing that. In fact, when TMK spoke about the Sanskrit education and the distance between Sanskrit and Tamil being very distinctly different in that sense. In fact, that's exactly my point. Um, in fact, I have opposed the teaching of Sanskrit as the third language in North India. In fact, my argument has been that Sanskrit has been used to sabotage the three language formula because it, in effect, is not learning any new language, that you do not end up learning any new script. And the teaching is so perfunctory anyway that they don't learn anything. So, the whole point of three language formula was that apart from your mother tongue and English, you would learn a modern Indian language which is distinct from your own language. And in fact, the original formulation of the three language formula clearly mentioned preferably South Indian languages for the North Indian Hindi speaking states. So, to my mind, the fact that Tamil is so different from other languages which are of Sanskritic origins is in fact an argument that supports the whole idea that of three language formula, because the point of the three language formula was to learn three languages which are very distinct, not similar. And this difference that TMK mentions is a difference not merely in Tamil Nadu. If you go to the northeast, there are, within Assam, for example, you have what are called plain tribes of Assam, who speak a language, who maybe, who are taught Assamese in school, but who speak a language which is Tibeto-Burman in origin. So it's absolutely a different. Their mother tongue has nothing to do with Assamese. And so you have these cases of differences, and the point, the argument in favor of three language formula is not dependent on these three languages being close to each other, just as English and Tamil are not close to each other. Similarly, the third language is meant to be different and distant from others. I could possibly have no difference on him about the caste privileges that are at work, the class privileges that are at work. Um uh, that in a sense only strengthens my point about English. I must say I'm disappointed in one respect, which is that in every single debate on language and in English language, the best minds of this country make an elementary conflation. I've been writing about it, and I'm now tired and sick of saying this again and again. There is the issue of whether English should be learned as a language. The answer is yes, it should be learned for all the good reasons that TMK has spelt out. Yes, it's a window. Yes, it's useful. Yes, given the international economy, etc., of course. If we have this thing, why should we trash it? We should learn the language. This is very different from the other question of should a child in Uttar Pradesh or Tamil Nadu be asked to learn geography, history, and mathematics in English language. That is English medium schooling. I would say without hesitation, without mincing any words, this is pedagogic barbarity. I challenge anyone to produce one single document written by anyone who has done research on pedagogy, language, brain development, or any related field, cognitive psychology. Show me one paper that says that a child would do well by learning in a language which is as distant from his home language as English is for at least 98% Indians. And I'm astonished to see that some of the best minds in this country do not want to take this into account. These are two very different questions. And what I have opposed is the what we need to take on is this madness called English medium instruction. And since TMK brought in the question of reality of how education is imparted, I think it's only fair that we also take into account the reality of how English medium instruction is imparted. In most of the rural schools, which I have happened to see, and TMK also gets to see, because the parents don't know English, the student doesn't know English, and the teacher doesn't know English. And these are English medium schools. I mean, this is not just a joke. This is criminal conduct, that the kind of thing we get to hear about Australian parents, the indigenous people of Australia, from whom their children were taken away because they needed to be civilized. I'm sure 100 years later we would speak something similar about what we are doing in the name of English medium instruction. On the final point, I would agree with TMK. The way to take on the hegemony of English language is not by attacking English. That would be silly. Of course, we should oppose the English medium instruction because it has no pedagogic value at all, unless someone were to produce one scientific paper, which I have never seen. Uh, the way to take on English is exactly what he said, strengthening our languages. That's been my argument to all the Hindi walas. In fact, this morning I've written an article to say, once again, to say, please strengthen your language. Instead of boasting and saying my Hindi is a national language, I mean, please produce one good international quality newspaper in your language. Please produce books of medicine and science in your language. So yes, the way to take on the hegemony of English language is to end this artificially created division between Indian languages, if necessary, by ending this practice of official language term, by creating a relationship between Indian languages where they learn from each other, where there is a massive translation from each other, and where the capacity of each of these languages to produce scientific work, to produce other things can be increased. If Koreans can do it, if Japanese can do it, our languages are several times bigger than any of these languages. Why can't we do that in our 20 languages? That is the way forward. It's a long civilizational challenge. And I suspect that much of the way we talk about this and the way we have surrendered to the idea of the ubiquity of English uh, takes us away from this civilizational challenge. And I suspect it is the English speaking elite of India which uses this ploy of pitting one Indian language against another so that the imperialism of English can continue.
Can I just respond?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I want to first say when I spoke about English, Yogendra, I was specifically speaking about English as a language, not as a mode of education to learn geography or history. And there, I think I'm in complete agreement with you that teaching those subjects in English as being the only way in which somebody will be educated, within inverted commas, is honestly offensive. And in fact, if you just look at many people who studied in the past, in the 60s and 70s, when they studied in public schools, and they learned English as just a language, and they learned maybe many of the subjects in their own mother tongue. They picked up a way of translating those words and those terms into English very fast once they were in college or etc. went to engineering. So that transition is not as difficult as people sometimes make it out to be. There is another thing hidden here, I think we are
If
missing.
I may say, you're speaking to someone who's a product of that. I
Exactly, I knew
learned,
exactly why. I thought you were, which is
I, I,
why.
I learned my English alphabets in class 6. I was taught Punjabi as a third language, a language that I can still read, I'm proud to say, although I've not had occasion to use it in my adulthood. So, yes, just to interject
No,
to say.
just to add, but there's another thing we are not discussing here is the honestly the rampant growth of private education in this country, and private English education, especially in this country. And this kind of oppressiveness that they have created, and this is, I mean, honestly, most of it is a mafia, and it separates society very distinctly. And I think the obsession with teaching every subject in English and English being the only way knowledge is accessed or assessed or valued, also comes from us allowing for the privatization of school education. I'm not even going to higher education at this point of time. I think that is also very closely connected to this issue that we are discussing. We probably are too far down the line in terms of doing it, winding back the clock. But I think there has to be a way by which private school education, school educators, and these multiple schools that just mushroom, CBSE schools being a fashionable thing, that is also something we are not addressing, because that is also where this English hegemony or this perceived Englishness is being pushed across very, very forcefully.
Complete agreement. Complete agreement. Absolutely.
Sorry, Prasad, I want to say one more thing. I missed one more thing. Exactly the reasons why Yogendra says there should be three languages and the distinctness is exactly the reasons why I feel there should be two languages. Coming from a Tamil speaking background, I think the fact is that is exactly why, because English is already so distinct from whatever language you speak, be it Hindi or Tamil. And as a Tamil speaking person, as a Tamil, I feel adding another language is actually not in any way helping this the child. So actually, the exact reasons why Yogendra feels we should have a distinct third language is the reason why I feel we shouldn't have a distinct third language. So I just want to just say that.
So what you're saying is that you leave language learning to the people and don't make a policy out of it. Don't impose it on the people, whether it's Hindi or English or any other Indian language. Let the government be just a facilitator. You provide the infrastructure if people want to learn a language, but don't impose it on them.
No, I'm not saying that. There should be a policy. There should be a language policy. Of course, it should not be imposed. Language policy should be evolved in consensus. The country, just as we should have a policy on how to teach mathematics, just as we need to have a policy on science teaching, similarly, we should have a policy on language teaching. As I said, some of the best minds of this country have reflected, including on the question that TMK raised about two language and three language being a burden, distinct languages being a burden. I mean, linguists and pedagogists have thought about it. There should be a policy, but the policy cannot be imposed. Someone sitting in Delhi cannot dictate Tamil Nadu about what that policy is. You can, at the most, make a suggestion. You can say, like I have said, why don't you please look at it? TMK doesn't agree. That's fine. But so I don't think it's a case for not having a policy. We should have a policy, and to my mind, the way forward would be to address some of the fundamental issues in our education. Three language versus two language or one language is not, as of now, the central question. The central question is about this mad rush to privatization, which is simply about where the quality of education has become a function of money, straightforward. Commercialization of education. The central question is also about the capacity and basic ability of skills of schools to impart anything to the children. One, two, three language comes later. These are things. On the language thing specifically, I really should think as a Hindi wala, I would say, and I've said that in an article this morning, Hindi walas should lead an agitation to demand an end to this Rajbhasha business, which has, just uh, uh, which has created a situation where we do not face the real issues of this country. I still believe that taking on the hegemony of English, and it's not merely a question of functionality. I think access to English language again is straight away conditioned by caste discrimination, by class discrimination. Uh, Taking what we need to have is a long-term policy of strengthening the capacity of Indian languages so that our multiple languages and multiple registers within each language can become the carrier of our creativity. I hear I the last week I heard TMK sing Narayan Guru, and I don't think that kind of creativity would have happened if he was. I mean, he's quite comfortable in English as well, but the kind of creativity, the kind of originality, the kind of expression of our soul that can happen in Tamil, in Malayalam, in different languages. Um, how can English replace that? So there is a serious deracination that is happening in our new generations. Language and the growth and hegemony of English language is the principal carrier of that mental slavery, if I were not to put too fine a point on it. And our long-term cultural policy should address it. Of course, not by issuing diktats from Ministry of Education, but by strengthening the capacity of Indian languages by bridging the distance between Indian languages in terms of political conflicts and so on. And I really must say that the Indian ruling class shows no desire to do so, because Indian ruling class is absolutely comfortable in the hegemony of English language, because that is the surest guarantee of perpetuating their class rule in this country. So yes, we need a language policy. We cannot simply leave it to the economy, but it has to be a more creative response, a response in which some of the best minds of this country, who respect their own languages and cultures deeply, they have to come together and come up with an alternative. Because, again, not to put too fine a point on it, we live in linguistic apartheid in this country. And if we say, in the face of linguistic apartheid, we say, oh, we don't need a policy, that would be very strange. Yes, we need to find ways of combating it. But in that battle, if Tamil and Hindi are standing on two different sides of the divide, nothing can be more tragic than this. And for me, the principal thing would be, how do we ensure that Hindi, Tamil, and dozens of languages that Hindi has subsumed, all of them stand on the same side of the divide?
So, Mr. Krishna, yeah, I think we are coming to the end of this podcast. So, how would you like to sum up the situation and the way forward?
Well, I mean, I do believe that two languages, as far as school education is concerned, suffice. The fact that they have to be taught well is important. There's another thing we've not talked about, is how we teach language. We don't teach language as a living being. We don't teach language as something that communicates between people, that's an emotional coefficient of relationship. We teach language like it's out of a textbook. We have to address that. Irrespective of what language we teach, we have to address how we teach languages. We do not teach languages as something that is part of a societal experience. And that is where we are failing, I think, all languages. I think that is something that's universally needs to be thought out by uh, the education department of every state, and of course policy. I wish our NEP had spoken about that, about the way in which we teach languages. We're not talking about those nuanced things. That's what we should be speaking about. Now, as far as two languages or three languages, I do believe that two languages in terms of teaching in a school suffice. What we are then saying is, how do we create access for people to learn whatever the other language they may want to learn in their lives? And to me, there needs to be an equality of access. They can't be, like Yogendra also said, this imposition of, for example, why only Hindi Prachar Sabha all over this country, right? Even if it is voluntary, we don't have, can we have multiple languages accessible to people who want to learn it? It's possible they'll want to learn it based on their occupational choices later in life. Maybe that should be made available. So I think it is important to give people access to the diversity of languages beyond what is in the schedule of the constitution too, as much as possible. And that is important. That is the spirit of a universal um, respect for each other's cultures, because languages are what? Languages in their various forms and tonalities. I'm a musician, I hear tone in a language, I hear melody in a language, are all representative of people's lives, people's histories, people's joys, people's difficulties, and that's the way we should give access to all that. But that, I believe, is beyond what a school system should do. But that is also something in which the government and people should participate. But if you ask me, should schools have three languages or two languages? At this point of time, I do believe that two languages there suffice. But we need to build a larger ecosystem. And if we really want to also address this issue of English, I think this is what will address English. Because then English will have its place, which it has, and its necessity, and its own beauty, its own recognition. But unless we build this ecosystem of languages, we've been talking about Indian culture. Unfortunately, the present dispensation loves to talk about. I think it is Indian cultures as much as it is Indian languages. And I think it's the plurality of what we give ourselves in larger society that is far more important than saying that there needs to be three languages in a school system. That's what I feel.
Right. So we come to the end of this podcast. I think with both of you, I don't think 1 hour would do. We could go on and on. It's a pleasure listening to both of you. There's so much of information, so much of insight that you could provide into this topic, and we're so happy that the Hindus, particularly happy that both of you found time to interact with us, especially at 9 p.m. um, um, and
Especially
you
after
know,
all your travel. So thank you so much.
yeah, yeah, yes, especially yes, for after a hectic travel, Mr. Yogendra Yadav managed to come and speak to us and at length, and giving us plenty of insight into what the policies should be, what is the way forward. Thank you very much, both of you, for interacting with us, and we hope to meet again, uh, either in this issue or over some other issue, because I think with the kind of insight that you can provide on any subject, we will have a very clear idea of what our approach has to be when it comes to language or other social issues. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.